Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you again for this Research Integrity Lunch. We have a nice program. Today, we're going to discuss codes of the learned societies, an interesting topic to discuss. What is the value of codes? What are disciplinary differences, for example, between codes? For that, we have invited Rosie Hastings and Jeanette Pols. Rosie Hastings will present, and Jeanette Pols will be the reviewer and the person who can ask the questions first. Before I'm going to introduce both of them, I'm just want to reiterate that it's great that we are here together, that we continue this tradition of research integrity lunches. And if you have a topic that you want to discuss, or if you know someone who has a topic that wants to be discussed here at the research integrity lunches, you can always contact me, you can contact Gauri, or you can also contact Doreen, and we can always find a way. We have, of course, already speakers planned for the coming months, but if you have a very urgent thing that you want to discuss, please feel free to contact us, and we can see what if we can arrange something there. And also spread the word. So that's another thing important. So if you know someone who might be interested in these lunches, it's low profile. You can always log in and follow a very nice presentation with speakers that really have know-how about research integrity.
Yuri, is it possible that also people join from outside of Amsterdam?
Yes.
Fellow doctors from Groningen, for example.
Yeah, or okay. From Hong Kong, or from Australia, or from New Zealand, or from the islands in the
Fiji.
Fiji Islands, Samoa, whatever. People can join, and that's the beauty. Okay. Well, there are disadvantages of online, but the beauty is also that it is online. So please spread the word and let them know that we have these lunches, and they're all invited. So, having said this, I'm happy to introduce first of all Rosie Hastings. She is actually working as a research assistant at the Department of Ethics, Law and Humanities here at the Amsterdam University Medical Center, and she's currently. I'm not sure where. I thought you were ready, but I heard that you're not ready yet with your master in philosophy of neuroscience, and you're currently finishing it. And you have worked in the past month very hard on this paper. You know everything about codes for sure. So I'm very happy that you're gonna talk today about that. And on the other end, I also like to briefly introduce Jeanette as well. She's a Socrates professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Amsterdam, and also is also an associate professor at our section here at the Amsterdam University Medical Center location AMC. And the mission of Jeanette is to build bridges between research in medical ethics and medical anthropology. So I'm very happy that you're here today, Jeanette. And after the presentation of Rosie, you will be the person that can ask the questions first. And after that, we will have an open discussion. So Rosie, welcome. Happy that you're here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yuri. Thanks, everyone. I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can see it now. So yeah, thank you, Yuri, for the introduction. And I'm glad to be here to be able to share the scoping review with you, which we recently conducted into guidance on research integrity provided by European discipline-specific learned societies. And this study was done by myself, Krishma, Iris, Lexi, and Natalie, and it was also part of the entire project. So today I will start by briefly introducing the aims and the methods of the study, and then I'll speak a little bit more in detail about some of the main findings and conclusions, and then I'll just mention some of the implications that we feel follow from these findings, and the recommendations that we would propose based on that. So at the moment, it's a bit unclear exactly how discipline-specific perceptions of research integrity correspond with more general guidance on the topic or with other disciplinary perspectives also. So the general aim of the study was to take a step towards addressing this. And in order to do so, we had three specific aims. Firstly, because this kind of analysis of guidance from learned societies hasn't really been done before, we wanted to assess the proportion and distribution of societies across disciplines that provide some form of relevant guidance on research integrity to their members. Relevant guidance in this case being codes of conduct or policies or recommendations or statements which provide guidance on research integrity related issues. Secondly, we then wanted to compare this guidance with the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which we're referring to as the ALLEA Code, to try to understand whether this general guidance or these general efforts to improve research integrity correspond with efforts to do the same within disciplines. And finally, we wanted to highlight the differences and similarities in guidance from societies of different disciplines. But in the end, we decided to focus on the differences more because there was really a lot to discuss and these seem to be the most interesting outcomes. So maybe just bear that in mind as I present the results. It's not the case that we only found differences between these groups. So in order to achieve these aims, we first had to find all of these European learned societies, which we did using a four-pronged search approach. So we performed a database search for literature related to learned societies' codes of conduct, as well as a Google search just to find these European societies themselves. And we combined these with a short list of European learned societies, which was already available on Wikipedia, and a list of the societies, which was created by Initiative for Science in Europe. And after removing duplicates and excluding the societies that didn't meet the inclusion criteria, we had a list of of 245 European discipline-specific societies. We then searched the websites of each of these societies looking for research integrity-related guidance, and we found 58 documents that fit with our inclusion criteria, and these came from 46 of the societies on the list of 245. So some had multiple documents. Once we had all of these documents, we performed a qualitative content analysis where we coded the documents according to three main categories. Firstly, principles, which are the propositions or values which guide conduct, such as honesty. Practices, which are the specific descriptions of types of research conduct or misconduct, for example, recommendations relating to open science. And responsible parties, which are specific individuals or groups who are recommended to adhere to or uphold a certain principle or practice. And this could be, for example, individual researchers or society members. So our first results relate to the proportion and distribution of societies which provide guidance. So first of all, it's quite interesting that only 46 societies, so less than 20% of the total number of societies that we identified, provide any recommendations at all. We also found either none or very few recommendations from the agricultural sciences societies, engineering and technology societies, and humanities societies. And for this reason, we grouped the humanities with the social sciences. So we discussed them together as the humanities and social sciences. And we included the only engineering and technology society together with the natural sciences. So in terms of absolute numbers, most recommendations come from the medical and health sciences, but note that roughly the same proportion, so around 24 or 25% of societies from the social sciences provide recommendations as well. So onto the qualitative results, we begin by describing the principles or values sections of society's guidance. And by this, I mean the distinct sections of text which don't really discuss actions directly, but they just outline the underlying motivations for the actions which will be discussed later in the text. So this is analogous to section 1 of the ALLEA Code, where the 4 key principles of reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability are described. And again, not very many societies include this kind of section within their codes, elaborating upon the principles which guide research behaviors. So there were only 15 societies who included this kind of section. And due to the smaller sample size, we also don't discuss this in extensive detail in the paper, but I will just give an overview of a couple of results here. So firstly, in the society's guidance, we The most frequently mentioned principles are those related to honesty and respect, with the most frequently mentioned in the medical and health sciences being respect, and the most frequently mentioned in both the natural sciences and humanities and social sciences being, on the medical and health sciences it's honesty, and in the natural sciences and humanities and social sciences it's respect, whilst the least frequently mentioned principles relate to reliability. And this can be seen here where in the humanities and social sciences, reliability related principles are not explicitly mentioned at all. Additionally, natural sciences societies mention related terms such as reproducibility or rigor, but the only discipline in which societies explicitly mention reliability is the medical and health sciences. And the quotes below just show this contrast a little bit. So the first is from a medical and health sciences society, where the concept of reliability that is encouraged focuses on the robustness of data. And the second is from a natural sciences society, where critical analysis, full, accurate, and objective reporting are encouraged. And an interesting difference that exists both between disciplines as well as between societies guidance and the ALLEA code is in the use of accountability related principles. So accountability, which is a core principle of the ALLEA code, was only mentioned verbatim by some medical and health sciences societies, but across all disciplines, including medical and health sciences, responsibility was the preferred term. And the first quote here is from the ALLEA code, which describes the fundamental principle of accountability. And the second is from one of the humanities and social sciences societies, where psychologists are seen to be responsible rather than accountable. And next, we move on to the practices. And as you can see from this figure, our analysis covered several domains, but I will just highlight a few examples. The first of which will be differences between societies guidance as a whole group and the ALLEA code. And then I will discuss the disciplinary differences afterwards. So first, I'd like to point out a few practices which came up in both sets of guidance, but they receive much less attention and guidance from the societies than they do in the ALLEA code. And these are data-related practices, open science practices, and supervision and mentoring. You can see that reviewing, evaluating, and editing is also on the less often mentioned side, but I'm just going to discuss the three in the red boxes at the moment. So the ALLEA code outlines good research practice within 8 contexts, 2 of which are training, supervision, and mentoring, and data practices and management. Open science itself doesn't have a dedicated context in the ALLEA code, but it is discussed throughout. But as shown here, none of these subcategories of practices were mentioned by more than half of societies in any discipline, and sometimes they were mentioned substantially less frequently, as can be seen for open science and the medical and health sciences in particular, and also supervision and mentoring as well. And I'll come back to the possible reasons for this towards the end. But moving on now to practices which were discussed in societies guidance, but not the ALLEA code. A group of practices which emerged as being important for many societies across disciplines was equality, diversity, and inclusion related topics. In the medical and health sciences, the focus with regards to this was mostly on addressing the gender imbalance within the discipline, and many societies also in other disciplines discussed equality, diversity, and inclusion in the context of conferences and events, and also employment and funding allocation. But this topic was also explicitly linked to research quality, as illustrated by the quote at the bottom, where efforts to include traditionally marginalized groups are seen to be essential to allowing the discipline to fulfill its full potential. Another more minor, but I think also interesting difference is how honest errors were or were not differentiated from misconduct and unacceptable practices. And this distinction isn't very explicitly made in the ALLEA code, nor in the medical and health sciences or humanities and social sciences societies guidance. However, 4 natural sciences societies quite clearly delineate honest from intentional errors, as can be seen in this quote from the European Geosciences Union, where examples of each are contrasted with one another, and it's very clearly stated that honest errors do not represent some kind of misconduct. So now moving on to the comparison between societies of different disciplines. So here I'm not going to dwell on the figures so much, because I think the differences can be more clearly described based on the details of the qualitative analysis. So on this slide, I've tried to summarize the main distinctions between disciplines with regards to conducting research, But this is a very brief and limited description, but hopefully it still gives some insights into what we found. So guidance from the medical and health sciences societies focuses a lot on the actual process of performing research, particularly the regulatory and procedural aspects of this. And some examples include recommendations which are designed to protect research participants and their data, as well as recommendations on how to properly manage conflicts of interest and relationships with industry more generally. And one thing we were also noting whilst analyzing these documents was which other guidelines or recommendations societies refer their researchers to. So there's a list available of around 100 other documents, non-societal documents, that were mentioned by societies within our sample. And these will also be uploaded to the Embassy of Good Science website. So if you're interested in seeing which other documents influence societies within certain disciplines, that might be worth looking at. But now for the natural sciences. So these societies focus more on reporting and disseminating research, more than the process of conducting the research. With researchers being encouraged to carefully consider the wider impacts of their research, as well as to carefully judge the quality of their data and conclusions, and whether or how to communicate these publicly. And this is often mentioned in relation to more complex or controversial research topics, such as climate science or nuclear research. And then the humanities and social sciences emphasize researchers' own competencies and skills, especially in navigating ethical considerations and responsibilities. And these quite often relate to the particularities of specific subdisciplines, such as the unique nature of research materials and data in anthropology, and to some extent also archaeology, where these data and materials are considered to be co-created or co-owned, or maybe both, with research participants or the wider community, which has particular implications then for data storage, sharing and use. And this is one example of the heterogeneity that we saw in the humanities and in the sample that we had of humanities and social sciences societies, which as a group include more applied subdisciplines, such as, for example, anthropology, archaeology, and also psychology, where recommendations often overlapped with those made by the medical and health sciences societies. Whereas this discipline, of course, also contains maybe more typical or traditional subdisciplines such as philosophy or literature, which are more distinct in terms of how research is practiced, or more different in terms of how research is practiced. And it's worth noting that this is very much reflected in the availability of guidance in the humanities and social sciences, which was dominated by the three subdisciplines that I just mentioned: anthropology, archaeology, and psychology. And you might remember from the bar graph at the beginning that we only found guidance from two humanities societies, and these were the European Archaeological Association and the European Association of Social Anthropologists. So the final category that we looked for in the guidance that I'll mention briefly before concluding was which parties are seen to be responsible for the recommendations being made. And I'm only going to mention these two groups because they were by far the most often mentioned. There was a very small difference in terms of how often they were most mentioned, but slightly more recommendations were seen as being the responsibility of research institutions or organizations. And we included societies in this category. So the primary responsibility of this group is seen to be to develop and disseminate guidance or other rules and regulations for appropriate conduct, and particularly in relation to practices related to research culture and environment, and also related to misconduct. And societies in particular, or societies specifically, should protect the interests of their members and support the needs of researchers. And via this, they help to advance knowledge and practice. And so generally, societies are seen to play a more supporting rather than a guiding role in the research landscape. And the responsibilities of individuals, including society members, are quite complementary to this, I think, with their main role as described in the guidance being to adhere to the guidance and the standards also set out by these organizations and societies, as well as to behave ethically and competently, for example, by engaging in training and education, which should be provided by the institutions, and to be welcoming and inclusive in their day-to-day interactions. So taken together, the roles and responsibilities described in the society's guidance, as well as the content of the guidance, both in terms of underlying principles and recommended practices shows a slightly greater focus on the social and societal dimensions of research than the guidance found in the ALLEA code. And in relation to our second aim, which was to compare codes of conduct from societies with the ALLEA code, we found some notable differences. And we think that these may be due to the specific role and associated responsibility that these learned societies have. And the fact that societies focus relatively more on creating a collegial and inclusive research community, as well as encouraging, for example, proper public engagement around research, might reflect the fact that societies are not primarily research performing organizations themselves, but they're membership organizations with responsibilities to the community that they represent. And coming back to the findings I presented about the relative lack of guidance on data-related practices, open science, and supervision and mentoring, it may be the case that one reason for this relative lack of attention on those topics is that these practices typically occur in the context of research institutions, either as a condition of employment as a researcher or because they're often dependent on institutional funding and infrastructures. And then with regard to our third aim of highlighting the similarities and differences that exist between societies' guidance, the differences that we've seen may reflect practical differences in how research is conducted between disciplines, such as, for example, the extent to which research is subject to oversight and regulation due to its applied nature or the inclusion of research participants. And these differences could also be reflective of differences in disciplinary histories, and perhaps the emphasis that certain disciplines put on certain practices, like conflicts of interest, for example, in the medical and health sciences, may represent efforts to safeguard against issues which have negatively affected research integrity and quality within these disciplines in the past. So from this, it may be concluded that a one-size-fits-all approach to developing research integrity guidance isn't possible and perhaps isn't desirable, and that therefore more attention is needed to these discipline-specific differences and considerations. And I think further research in this direction can give us additional insights into the differences between general and discipline-specific approaches more broadly, as well as a more nuanced idea of the different discipline-specific approaches. And also it seems that there are perhaps differences between guidance that is directly research focused and that which is more community or socially and societally focused. And this might be a very interesting avenue for future research as well. Another question that would be worth pursuing is exactly what the link is, if any, between general guidance like the ALLEA code and the process of developing research integrity guidance within disciplines in a societal context. So although we found that many societies did refer to other non-societal guidelines or legislation, only 2 societies actually referred directly to the ALLEA code. And this was done quite briefly also. And it's worth bearing in mind when thinking about these results that it's not completely clear how this guidance from learned societies is actually used by the members of these societies. So to properly evaluate the significance of these findings, it would be nice to investigate whether and to what extent researchers are aware of and guided by these recommendations. So one of the key take-home messages of this study is really that very few societies actually provide any research integrity guidance to their members. And we would therefore suggest that societies take the opportunity to reflect on the needs of their researchers within their disciplines and develop appropriate guidance in line with this. And this applies, I think, particularly to societies outside of the medical and health sciences and some social sciences, where most of the kind of dominant perceptions of research integrity come from. And we would also suggest that societies can learn from one another's guidance because they, as a group, perhaps do have a kind of different focus to universities or other research performing organizations, and in a way a similar focus to one another in terms of these more social or societal aspects. But at the same time, there are these disciplinary differences with some societies having a lot more information available about certain practices. So perhaps new discoveries can be made in the guidance of another learned society. Also, if it is applicable, societies should consider explicitly endorsing general guidance like the ALLEA code. Whilst on the other hand, I think it would also be beneficial for general efforts to develop research integrity, like those coming from ALLEA, to consider disciplinary perspectives which are expressed in society's guidance and perhaps elsewhere in future developments of either the ALLEA code or other more general research integrity guidance. So that's everything from my side. So thank you very much. And I look forward to the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Rosie.